A lot is going on in the world of media, and definitely a lot's going on in the election. So we'll be having conversations about that. We've even got a guest that'll be coming in from another part of the world, which we sometimes have been having lately, but he's not always in attendance. So Professor Sharif is here, and we've also got Shaquille and others that'll be joining in this conversation as well. So we know a lot of people are paying attention to the media and how the media is covering various campaigns. I know that North Carolina has been a stumping ground of a lot of campaigns. I believe that Trump is in Raleigh at some location or another today, and I believe that actually Jill Biden is here in Durham doing a canvassing event or something along those lines. And I think that other both surrogates as well as the candidates themselves have been stumping hard in North Carolina, since North Carolina is seen as a major swing state and all along those lines. One of the things that I'm oftentimes frustrated by, and I'm actually one of those folks that is in the field of media, and it's a thing that's been going on for years. So I guess I'll bring up Adam Lambarella and we'll bring it up and we'll talk about it, and all along those lines of this notion of if it bleeds, it leads, and all along those lines. It's something that even when I was working at a newspaper, an African American newspaper back in the mid 80s and all along those lines, my publisher at the time, and he has since passed, had a thing called the Red Line, and it was very much the sensational story of the day and all along those lines. And he would put that up, and he often liked to put up crime stories because he thought that that would get people's attention and all along those lines in that space. My editor at the time, Grover Bailey, and I'm not sure if Grover is still with us among the living and all along those lines because we lost touch with each other and all in that space, would sometimes use it to talk about other issues. I remember even doing a story around AIDS because the AIDS epidemic was going on, and other things that were done in order to get away from that notion of sensationalism. So it was kind of his way of combating against sensationalism by trying to bring in issue oriented politics and all along those lines and in that space. So I'll bring in Adam and all along those lines because, like I said, is one that's got a degree in journalism from a prestigious university, that being Marquette University, and all along those lines. And haven't had professors that were both, and I know how you feel about the education system, but I would say that at that particular school, at that particular time, there were professors that were both on the right and the left and all along those lines. And that's one of the things that I enjoyed about my university was I got to hear different viewpoints, some viewpoints that I agreed with, some viewpoints that I didn't agree with, and all along those lines. But I do know that sometimes I get frustrated even here in our local politics when the first stories is usually the wreck of the day, and we know that a lot of car drivers, and I know even you've seen it when you've driven around cars, whether that's been in California or we're in New Jersey or some of the other places that you've been at it and everything along those lines, and people are rubbernecking. And I think that that's what goes on in our media and all of those lines because we're looking for those kind of like disasters and waiting for the car crash. Even though I live in North Carolina, I was never a overt fan of NASCAR, but I know that a lot of people like to go to NASCAR races because they want to see not necessarily the Dale Earnhardts or the Richard Pettys, and yeah, I know I just dated myself of the world winning the race, but they want to see the crash happen. And like I said, there's a lot of conversation about crime and all of that kind of nature, and I sometimes get frustrated even as a journalist in that space. But as a professor, is it just me, or do you get sometimes frustrated when you turn on your local news and it's the crime of the day? I'm not saying the crime isn't important. Shucks, my local apartment complex puts out a daily report practically as to what crime has happened recently and all along those lines. So I'll get probably 4 or 5 times a day that'll say something like zero point 0.5 miles from you a robbery happened, or zero point 0.7 miles from you an assault happened, or all along those lines. So it can be good, but it can also be nerve wracking. But what is your take on this kind of nature of how we become so saturated in wanting to see the bad side of the human existence? You're on mute, Adam.
I think it's overwhelming for people. I don't think it's particularly informative. So, in a democracy, one of the critical things to ensure that it functions properly is to enable citizens to be informed. And how does that happen? It happens by exposing citizens to diverse perspectives so that they can understand the different components of an issue and make a reasoned judgment. What we've seen in the media these days is near total bias. as evidenced in the current presidential election against Donald Trump. And it really is shameful. The bias is so palpable that the media has gone so far as to misrepresent and take out of context things Donald Trump has said, such as the other day when the Drudge Report and Joe Scarborough reported that Trump wanted Liz Cheney executed and that he wanted reporters executed. That is so irresponsible, so harmful to a properly functioning democracy, because when you have that bias and you spread misinformation, you don't create an informed citizenry, you create a divided society whose opinions are based on ignorance rather than information. And the real interference in democracy, the real tragedy to our democratic process, has been a biased media composed almost solely of left wing liberals.
Well, just really quickly along those lines, and I would definitely, I see Rick's got his hands up and everything. I sometimes wonder about the impact of social media as well, because what I'm finding, and maybe you disagree, is that there is a lot of people existing in silos and they are covering whatever is their silos viewpoint. You mentioned the Drudge Report. I've seen Midas Touch. I've seen also those that are on the right as well. And I even saw it when as I've said on this network, meaning PODTV before, I used to be very active in Clubhouse, which is a social media app and everything. And I found people that were like-minded often would go into their like-minded rooms, and I think the same can be said for Facebook, for a number of outlets and everything. So I was just wondering how much of it is I believe the term is called confirmation bias, where you're going to areas that you know that people will agree with you and not necessarily going
Well,
to other viewpoints.
Mark, you're 100% right, because what social media does is it gives a platform to morons on both the right and the left to spew absolute nonsense and to spew biased information that, again, does not inform the citizenry, does not encourage the exchange of diverse viewpoints and a marketplace of ideas. The responsibility of the media, indeed of the citizenry, should be to welcome different perspectives, welcome different opinions, so that we can hear the universe of perspectives that ultimately allow us to be informed and make a reasoned decision. What we're seeing now from channels like MSNBC, CNN, is such bias. And we saw this in the presidential debate when the bias of the moderators was so obvious. That type of stuff is disgusting. Now, there's bias by conservatives too. Let's look at Fox News. Fox News is biased in favor of the right. So both are culpable and both are anathema to a democracy that can properly function and lead to the selection of competent leaders.
I agree with you on that. Rick, I think you had your hand up first, but then Sasha had his
And
hand
I
up.
was going to agree with Adam that Trump does enough stuff that you don't that legitimately is like weird or not great politically, like the whole BJ thing, pretending to suck on his, that you don't need to cherry pick and selectively I mean, on both sides, really. I'm going to both sides this, like, that you don't need to present clips out of context to increase their impact. And yeah, that's what was done with the Cheney thing. He said stuff about Cheney in the past, I think, that's more, anyway, I mean, yeah, you need to include selective editing is bullshit, is what I'm saying.
Before I get to you, Sasha, and everything, and I get ready to get to you, the other thing that has been interesting, I know it's been out there for decades and everything, but I don't know whether it is done fairly or not, and maybe you have opinions about this, but there's this notion of trying to be fair to both sides. And part of what happened, in my understanding, is it can even been done in the context of entertainment, because SNL did a whole skit where apparently Maya Rudolph, who plays Kamala Harris, got to basically talk to Kamala Harris, and it was basically became like a campaign event to some degree and everything along those lines. And the flip side of that was then, as I mentioned on World Edition, there were complaints from the Trump camp that it wasn't fair use and everything. So they then got a chance to counter it by having, and I mentioned this earlier, I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan. Don't ask me why, because I grew up in North Carolina, but I've always been a fan of them ever since the Fran Tarkenton days and all along those lines. But they got to counter after the Minnesota game with an ad, and the ad actually was a very harsh ad, because it talked about how if Kamala Harris was elected, we'd be heading toward World War III, and painted a very negative economic standpoint and all along those lines. But it sounds like it was part of that fair use kind of doctrine that's supposed to be out there in terms of electoral commercials and everything along those lines. Adam, is that your understanding of it? You're the lawyer in the bunch, and then I'll definitely get to Sasha.
No, thank you. You can carry on.
Go ahead, Sasha.
Carry on.
Well, what was the last part of your question?
Adam, when you said something before in your last presentation, I wanted to ask you some question concerning what you were just saying. Instead, Mark asked Rick to say something for 3-4 minutes.
And
then hold on, and then he himself started to talk for 8 or 9 minutes. So now whatever I wanted to say now is irrelevant. So therefore, just carry on conversation. Don't worry about me.
Who talked for 8 or 9 minutes? Me?
He said I talked long and everything, and I do it in the monologue, but I was actually going by the order of the hands. Rick actually raised his hand first, and then I was going to get to you, Sasha. And I probably did go wrong by going to Adam with that question, but it just popped in my head because I knew he was a lawyer.
No, go ahead, Sasha. Go ahead.
Sasha, by deference, it is your turn.
Well, you just mentioned the social platforms. They are there to spew up a lot of lies and deceiving information. How come they're not responsible for paying the damages for the lies what they're spreading out? Why wouldn't every social platform put a bond of $100 billion that would guarantee that they will comply with the rules that every lie would have to be punished, and then once their $100 billion will be gone, they will put another $100 billion to continue to spread the lies.
Yeah. Well, Adam, did you want to respond to that? And also what I asked, and Shaquille, if Shaquille wants to come on, love to have his voice from Australia.
I don't really have much to say except that the incontrovertible fact is that the American media has become so biased on the right, on the left, that it's prohibited citizens from really observing a reasoned discourse where people are intellectually honest and have diverse perspectives and aren't trying to push an agenda, whether it's conservatives or liberals. That's damaging to democracy. And I will say, though, that the bias against Trump, particularly in the presidential debate, was disgusting. The bias on MSNBC is so bad that it has lost all credibility. Fox News is similar in their bias, but I don't think necessarily to the same extent, because what you see, if you look at the statistics, is over 90% of the coverage of Trump is negative. You see the media spreading misinformation about what he said and about what he will do. That leads to interfering in free and fair elections because it bases elections on disinformation and on preconceived agendas and narratives, and not on an honest debate about issues that allows diverse perspectives to have full and fair hearing.
Adam, I'm very disappointed that you don't address the difference between bias and outright lies. For you, okay, they're biased and they're biased, but there is a huge difference, because bias, that's not something that you can easily punish, because you know that CNN, MSNBC, and others, they're biased toward Democrats. You know that Fox News and others biased toward Trump. So whenever he turned in his little TV to watch a program, he has to have a little brain in his head to understand what he's going to watch. He's going to be MSNBC that's going to be heavily biased against Trump. And he must understand that. If not, turn off your TV, turn on, go to Fox News and listen to that. But
all right, well, you just said something.
You cannot punish bias, but outright lies is completely different story. And I'm talking about primarily social media.
Yes, and the media lied when it said Donald Trump threatened to execute Liz Cheney. And I want to respond to Terry McCain. Terry, thank you for your comments. She says that Trump means what he says when he will use the military against the evil within. He did not say that. That was not the context within which he said it. He was not referring to using the military against citizens. And once again, the fact that you have that view, I don't fault you for that. That's because the media has completely misinformed the American people, just like they misinformed the American people when they said Trump wants reporters shot and Liz Cheney shot. So you want to call out lies, Sasha? Call out those networks.
So, all right, so we can deplore the lies and the bias. How do we fix it? There's a ton of money in selling a certain point of view. like all the Fox News anchors make 30 million a year. I don't know how much they make over on MSNBC, but it's probably at least 10 million a year for their people. And the Russia spends a ton of money, not a ton, it's cheap to do propaganda on social media. How do you clean any of this stuff up?
Well, just really quickly along those same lines, I want to hear from Shaquille as well. One of the things that I have complained about for decades, even before joining PODTV and everything, is this notion that a lot of the media is corporate owned and has been corporate owned for a number of years. There is a known fact that a lot of urban radio is run by Radio One and a group called Clear Channel. It's not a hidden fact, just like a lot of media is owned by Live Nation, which is a major corporation. I would argue that a lot of media on the right is owned by Rupert Murdoch and some of his franchises as well. So with such a proliferation of money and big money in media, isn't that part of the problem? And I don't know if that's still so much the problem in Australia, as you travel much more of the world than I do, Shaquille and everything. But is this a strictly American problem, or is it a problem that a lot of our media is being controlled by very powerful media outlets that own multiple franchises?
I find it very interesting that Adam and I were the first people to join this show, and that Rick and Sasha came in after me because they were on economics and were brought up before me, and were then able to have multiple comments before I got a chance to say anything or had a question directed at me. It's very, very interesting and very telling. Look, there are, 7 major companies that control 90% of the world's media, something like that. So, yeah, there is inherent bias. And I think that if you look at Jeff Bezos, his op-ed in Washington Post, he actually talks about the fact that people are turned off by big media. They're not listening to big media anymore. And that's the real damage that's being done, because it's the boy that cried wolf syndrome. It may well be the case that some of the things that our viewer Terry and others have brought up, it may well be the case that those things have happened. Now, the specific examples that she's using, I don't agree with. I'll just echo what Adam said. That Donald Trump didn't say those things in that way. But the real damage that's being done is when people stop trusting the media, when something really does happen, they're not going to believe the media because they think the media has lied to them. So I think the solution is actually for people to stop watching. And it's not just stop watching CNN and MSNBC, etc. CNN, I think, are trying to be more pragmatic, shall I say, or more even-handed. I think that that's the direction that they're trying to head in. But Fox is very, very biased towards the left. New York Post is very biased towards the left. And so what you would have to do to try and get a holistic picture of things is you would have to subscribe to multiple different newspapers. You would have to watch multiple different news sources. And most people don't have the time or the inclination to do that. As I said before, when I'm trading the markets, I will read reports that will tell me that a particular stock looks really good, but I'll also go out of my way to find reports that will tell me the opposite, so that I can kind of make a judgment for myself. And then I'll also do my own analysis and then work out what I'm going to do. Am I going to do the same thing in politics? No, I don't have that sort of time. So I'm going to have a look at what's happening. If something sounds a bit ridiculous, then I'll question it and have a look into it. For example, when Donald Trump was accused and continues to be accused of saying there was good people on both sides and not having admonished the white nationalist, that is a bold-faced lie, and it's been debunked. Even by left-wing places, that has been debunked. So, that's the sort of thing that erodes the trust that people have in media. And yes, we have the same issue in Australia. I think you've sort of got that issue in Canada, although I think Canada is probably a little bit better for it. Europe is very similar, but I don't think it is anywhere near as pronounced as what it is in the United States. And very interestingly, when I was in Africa multiple times last year, reading their newspapers, they would actually criticize both sides of politics, and they would also talk about what was positive. When I was in Fiji, very similar thing. They would talk about some of the social division that's happening because of the Fijian native population and the Indians that were brought there by the British, and some of the issues that they're facing. And it was actually quite refreshing to see. So here we have developing countries with a more honest media than what we have. And a big part of that is also the overabundance of money coming in from big corporate donors that try to shape public perception.
So people, you said the solution is to stop watching, and that goes on naturally. Johnny Carson's Tonight Show averaged 30 million viewers a night. Now each late night talk show is doing fine if it gets 1 million viewers. Kimmel himself says that late night shows are going away in the next 5-10 years. And you look at like Fox News, they're the most important probably conservative media outlet. They only average like 3 million viewers, which is 1% of Americans. And newspapers are shrinking. You know, the LA Times is down to just like a sliver of what it was. So
the reason for that, though, in my opinion, is because they have given up on actually trying to be funny. I mean, what's Stephen Colbert going to do? He comes out in the late show.
Wait, I got to counter that because it's all network TV. They all follow the same curve. That people, there are more alternatives to network, and so they all declare. Every time there's a media strike, the SAG or the Writers Guild, they lose another 10% that doesn't come back.
Hey, Rick, along those same lines.
Sorry, hang on, I'm halfway through a sentence.
Okay, go ahead.
I believe that this is their own fault. They're doing this to themselves because then they've given up on even trying to be funny. Stephen Colbert comes out and all he does is just bag Trump, right? Jimmy Kimmel, I know you worked for him, but he has a very similar thing, very anti-Trump, very liberal and progressive in his thoughts. You have a look at all of the major shows, they're all doing the same thing and people are tired of it. The other thing is that people are not that interested in politics, and they really shouldn't be anyway. Politics should be something that happens in the background. That you think about it, you think about education funding, healthcare funding, that sort of stuff. It shouldn't be 24/7 in your face. And all of these issues are they're in your face constantly. You go and watch a movie at the cinemas, it's in your face. You try to watch a television show or a sitcom, it's in your face. You try to go to a sports game and it's in your face. It's just this constant thing. And it does make people become tribalistic because they have to choose a side, right? And look, Sasha and I don't tend to agree on Donald Trump. That's okay. Sasha and I are still friends. Who cares? Who cares if we don't agree on that? Where Sasha and I bond is over our conversations in relation to financial trading and in relation to chess, more so probably the financial trading. I don't care how Sasha has a different opinion to me, but what's happening today is it's like you're not allowed to disagree with somebody. You know, we've actually seen, like here in Australia, we just saw the former Premier of Victoria tell certain religious groups that they shouldn't fund any organisation, any charitable organisation, who doesn't actually take a stand on something. So they're actually trying to force people to not even be neutral. And then what they get is a result that they're not happy with, and they call everybody racist. The world doesn't work that way. And what's happening is we've got some real problems facing the Western world. Terry Kane, I think is her name. She put a post up on the previous show on economics about the hardships and the difficulty in trying to be able to buy a home and trying to just have a reasonable life. Okay, this is a real problem, and instead of us focusing on how we can help the middle class, how we can help people to get ahead, how we can make the tax system fairer, right? Don't just attack the rich for no reason, but actually make it fairer, more reasonable, more efficient. Instead of that, we get into these tribal arguments, and nothing ends up happening. While we're sitting there arguing about what a woman is, they're making off with all the money, and they're making off with all the power. And the real sadness of it is, if you happen to be a real capitalist and a believer in capitalism like I am, what you're seeing is small businesses being pushed out of the market and big corporations taking over. I don't think that's healthy, and it's not the way that we should live. We should not be looking at a situation where we're deteriorating in our quality of life. And again, you're seeing that all over the world. In France, they did a poll a handful of years ago, and 95% of respondents said that they thought their children and grandchildren would have a worse life than what they've had. What are we doing in the West? This is ridiculous.
Just really quickly, Sasha, you had a point, and I was going to bring up something that's as well. But go.
I'd like to point out that as I would like to be stay on top in politics, also in financial markets, and it is a dilemma where you get your information. I found the best source are well regarded publications like The Economist, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, if you wish, but even these two publications, probably Forbes, online, they are coming very good timing, almost instantly whenever something happens. They are tested sources of information, and you don't have to really go through million of different publications and websites and figure out, oh, this side they're all lying, this side is biased, this side is this and that, and make your judgment. You just don't have time for that. I don't generally. So for me, these 3, 4 publications, period. I don't look into anything else because everything else most likely is garbage. So why would I spend my quality time for looking at the garbage? Full stop, period.
But Sasha,
Also,
along those same
Sasha,
lines,
that's
brother,
perhaps because sometimes what you're looking at, you have to check to
Yeah,
see
I
whether or
mean,
not they're actually, being truthful and impartial. And if they're not, that's okay. There are things that aren't impartial, but there are some news services that basically get news that they sort of amalgamate. It's the wrong word for all the different news sources, and they can actually tell you this is what the left newspapers are saying, this is what the right media is saying. So you
Not
can
good
kind of
enough.
get some sort of feel. But
Not
you're right. It's very hard for anybody to be able to know everything that's going on. And what it does is it creates bias. I'm biased against Kamala Harris, not because of media, I don't think, but because I don't actually like her economic policies. I don't think that they work, right? But the other thing that really annoys me is if we talk about taxation and economics, what really annoys me is the United States, that the people in the United States that just refuse to acknowledge or to even consider that maybe increasing the marginal rates of tax is not a good idea. And it doesn't matter what you say to people. Like I've explained at length on economic shows and on other shows, if you increase marginal rates of tax, it's not going to work when the wealthy aren't earning an income. If you try to increase a capital gains tax, they'll change it. If you try to introduce a wealth tax, the very wealthy, and I'm talking about the top 1%, I'm not talking about, the top 10. The very wealthy will use international trusts and things like that, so the assets are not theirs. Discretionary trusts, for example, the assets aren't theirs, so they're not having to pay tax. And because the asset's not theirs, you can't put a wealth tax on them. So we need to have some proper solutions. And if any time you suggest that a tax cut and a broadening of the tax base would be a better way of doing it, you just get told, well, you're just trying to favour the rich. And I notice that certain people, including viewers that are here today, are pretty quick to attack somebody like Adam, who I don't consider to be wealthy, or myself or others, as if somehow we are the pariahs of society. I came from nothing. My parents, my mother, it was a poor farming family in a house that was built by her father, with bloody tin, like a shanty type thing, right? The next generation above me, they talk about sitting there trying to study with a candlelight as the rain came through and that sort of stuff, and sleeping on the floor. They came from absolute poverty. They came to Australia. They were cleaners and they were building themselves up as they're trying to put themselves through university. And one generation after, we all, I'm obviously doing better than my cousins, but they all have, good jobs. They work in IT, they work in medicine, they, are doing all these things. And somehow now we are the pariahs of society, because when we try and talk about what has actually held us back from having an achievement, or what the problem is with the tax code, or when we say, hey, look, maybe we do need to increase social services, but to do so, you need to have a tax system that's more similar to what they have in Europe, if that's the path that the United States want to go down. All of a sudden, we're the bad guys because we're wealthy and we don't care about the poor. So the only solution that's being offered is increased marginal rates of tax. That doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We've been talking about it for decades. Arthur Laffer has talked about this for decades. It doesn't work.
I hear what you're saying, Shaquille, but I do have a question about the media system, the media show, and all along those lines. And this is my quick question, everybody. When I was growing up, there was a number of papers that had a personal view, and they did not have that personal view, and I actually enjoyed reading them. And like I said, sometimes there were papers that I didn't even necessarily agree with. You mentioned The Economist. The Economist definitely had a economic view and everything. I grew up in the era of Mother Earth News, which was definitely a very climate oriented paper and everything along those lines and everything. But I also grew up in the era of a magazine literally called The Progressive, and that was before progressive was a term and everything. And there was even African news, and even some people would argue you can counter this argument if they want to and everything, and maybe people that are watching will disagree with me, but I think Reader's Digest actually took a very to some degree Christian perspective and all along those lines, the historical Reader's Digest and all along those lines. But it seemed like we were allowed to have papers that were intentionally biased, but with people could read them if they chose to or not and everything. But you knew what the bias was, and I don't know that there's enough of that going on now. Because, like I said, this was the 70s and 80s when I was growing up and everything. So, Rick and Sasha,
Well, I'd like to respond. I know Sasha's had his hand up, so let's go to Sasha first,
yes,
and then I'll come in.
Shaquille, question to you. Speaking about taxation, okay, if you will tax 1% of the richest people in America, say to 75% from capital gains, from wages if they are receiving any, from all assets, including real estate, and make offshore banking forbidden and illegal. You can tell me, oh, if that's going to happen, a lot of these people will leave United States and go elsewhere. And you know what? It's not a big problem, because by not paying taxes and avoiding taxes by all legal and illegal means, they're not contributing much anyway. So go and fly to Spain or to Norway or to wherever you want to fly, and bye-bye. What
Okay.
do you say about it?
Okay, so I think you're misunderstanding what I'm trying to say. Okay, let me be clear. I do believe that the wealthy, including myself, you're going to put me in that category, although I'm not a billionaire or anything like that. I do believe that the wealthy should contribute more than other people do. All right, I do believe that. It's not a question of should the wealthy pay more. I think most people accept that they should. And even if you talk to billionaires who are on the left and on the right, they all kind of say the same thing. In my personal position, and again, I don't earn that sort of money, but in my personal position, if I had the choice between being taxed differently and it costing me more than being in the situation I'm in right now, where I've got my situation all over the world, I would choose to pay more. I actually would, for the convenience of not having to comply with all these complex regulations. The question is, how do you best initiate a tax system that will actually capture the contributions of the very wealthy? And what I'm saying is that increasing the marginal rate of tax doesn't work. It just simply doesn't work. And then if you were to try to introduce some of the things that you just talked about, one, I don't think it's practical. If you did happen to force it through, I think that you would actually crash the economy. But more importantly, is then you have to deal with, especially in a country like the United States, which is open to foreign investment, then you have to deal with the fact that your local population is going to be put at a disadvantage to foreign investors who don't have to pay taxes. For example, capital gains is taxed. It's realized in the place where you were a tax resident, not in the place where the capital gain actually occurred. So there's a whole heap of international things that are going on. But here are some changes that I would suggest. Flatten out the tax curve, okay? Try to make sure, as far as possible, that people that are in similar economic positions are contributing similar amounts. That's something that we really need to focus on. We need to focus on what percentage of the GDP of the country you want the government to be spending on behalf of the people. Then you can work backwards on the best way of being able to capture that. When it comes to dividends and things like that, or income that has been earned within the country, you could introduce things like withholding taxes. Okay, there's all sorts of other alternatives to be able to get there. But because, look, most people are not going to be taxation experts or economic experts, right? That's perfectly fair enough. But we need to be able to have proper conversations about it. And for as long as we don't, all you're going to see is the wealthy, the very wealthy, and the big corporations just continue to skirt the system, to find loopholes, and to reduce their taxes. And then they say, well, look, the rich have gotten richer. Okay, well, what do you want to do about it? Oh, well, they'll just increase taxes again. It doesn't work. We know it's not working. Oh, look at Sweden. Sweden's got a system that, if the United States introduced, would fix a lot of problems in the US. Not only would they be able to roll out the social services that they want, they'd also be able to pay back some of the massive debts that they've got. But they'll never do it. They'll never, ever do it because it takes too much effort for politicians to sit down with the American people and be honest about the actual situation.
Under no government, US will ever be able to decrease its debt. It's impossible. It's something that you will have to leave for next generations. The only thing is, what you can actually do is substantially reduce interest rates. So therefore, the annual payments on the debt will be much less than they are now, because they're exceeding military budget of the United States, and this is a sign of decline, as I said on previous show. So if they will reduce now, what's interest is 4%, 4.5%, reduce it to 0.75%. Oh, and then it will substantially reduce payments. Also, it will make U.S. economy much more economically viable and competitive, because the US dollar will go all the way down. So American products, American produce, will become much more viable and desirable in the world.
Well, yeah, but you know what?
So
This is one of the problems with Trump's tariffs, right? Last time I checked, the United States, someone can fact check this, that they import about 3 trillion. They export about 3 trillion. They import about $3.8 trillion. So even if you were to have a 20% tariff across the board, that would theoretically only raise, $1 trillion. It's not going to be a solution for the income tax. You make the point about lowering interest rates. When the Great Recession happened, people were complaining that reducing interest rates was actually a subsidy to the banks and was hurting people on fixed incomes. Now, I do agree with you. However, my concern would be that if you artificially decrease interest rates, what you do is you take away the mechanism for the Federal Reserve to react and respond to the next financial crisis. And it is worth noting that higher interest rate countries can be used as an anchor for a carry trade, which forces inward investment. We saw that with the UK, with the old carry trade between the Japanese yen and the UK and the British pound. And of course, when the UK dropped their interest rates precipitously, there was something like $5 trillion that exited that market within a few days. So it's worth saying that if the United States would like to actually be able to bring more foreign money into their country, maybe having an interest rate that's a little bit higher but is actually workable could actually be a solution. Not least though, I will say, in relation to the ridiculous debt levels that the United States had. I think you're correct, and probably the way they'll need to deal with it is to curb spending or increase their revenue, or both. They can also deal with it by inflation, slow and steady inflation over time, as well as a growth in the size of their economy. And there is going to be some headwinds facing them with the BRICS nations that are expanding around the world. And there is no question in my mind that the BRICS nations eventually will actually dramatically increase their percentage share of the world's GDP. The United States has got some significant issues facing it. We need to have a bit more honesty from our politicians in the United States and in the rest of the Western world that are closely allied with the United States.
Sasha, for the last several months, you've come on this show and trashed Donald Trump and blamed him for almost everything possible that he could possibly be blamed for.
Haven't done it today yet.
He's responsible. He's responsible for all the evils in the world.
He's calmed down.
He deserves credit for nothing, zero. But what you haven't said is that the debt got almost equally worse under Biden than it did under Trump. You haven't,
because of COVID.
When I said that I was paying 20 to 30% more at the grocery store, you haven't really acknowledged the effect of inflation on people like me, the effect of high housing prices that have made it impossible for me to buy a house and most people to achieve the American dream. And if we focus on those things, I think you'll find that life was better under Trump than under Biden.
That's different people's opinion. Apparently, there's like 49.
Wow, let Sasha respond. I think Sasha should have a chance to respond to it.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, Kroger's shares are slightly down today, 12 cents. But it's not a big deal. They're doing okay, thanks to people like you, of course. And now I'll tell you one thing. If you think that I'm a big fan of Biden and Kamala Harris, or both of them, it's a gross understatement. I probably I can criticize Biden, not so much Harris, simply because she hasn't done yet anything, and unless she will become a president, she'll never do anything in her life beyond what she's already done as a prosecutor or so on. And to tell the truth, if Trump will have at least as vice president Nikki Haley, so okay, that's plausible. Okay, she's a woman, she's Indian, she's this and that, and she has more uh, humanity on her side, and much more than Trump, of course. And so that could be viewed as a positive choice, especially before Kamala Harris came on stage. So when that was Biden and that was convention, and he would introduce Nikki Haley, who already came to the convention and said that she's with Trump and so on and on. No. J.D. Vance, okay, here's my guy. Okay, tomorrow you will both go to trash of history. Both you, J.D. Vance, and Trump. Well, Trump will not go away because there will be a hearing in a few days after election, and he will be sentenced. So his long way to recovery through the jail system is ahead of us. And you know what? It's entertainment. Why not to sit down and
Foreign leaders will have zero respect for Kamala Harris and run circles around her. Foreign
even
leaders fear Trump. Trump will end the Ukraine war.
no
Putin will
longer,
walk circles around Harris.
no longer, Adam, 8 years ago, that could have been truth. Not today. Twice impeached loser who lost everything in his life, all the money.
Political impeachment,
Sasha,
political prosecutions. And of all people,
you
you
know,
should be against political persecution, Sasha. I'm surprised you
but
haven't
you know what,
defended
Sasha?
Trump.
Let me,
No,
Sasha. I've noticed this a lot recently with many people who are against Trump, is that they will now say, well, he could have achieved those sorts of things if we had the old Trump from 2016. But you didn't like him back then either. Come on now. And you can't honestly tell me with a straight face that you believe. Look, I don't expect you to like Trump. I'm not trying to convince you to like him, okay? But you can't honestly tell me that you think that Kamala Harris will be able to negotiate anything with Vladimir Putin or the Rocket Man or any other hostile person or Iran or Saudi. I mean, she's just not the right person for the job. And it's not because she's a woman, because I can tell you now, the one person that I would absolutely love to see back involved at the highest levels of American politics is Condoleezza Rice. I think that she is the right kind of person. All right. I remember saying last year that what Donald Trump should do is get Condoleezza Rice, not just because she's a black woman, because I think that she's really experienced. I think she's really smart. And I think she knows how to get things done, but we haven't seen that. So hang on a second. So I agree with you that JD Vance may not have been the greatest pick, right? I agree with you. I think that he's been very impressive in his debate skills, but I don't think that being a good debater it means that you're going to be a good leader. Okay, he said some pretty silly things. Maybe he's not the right person, but Tim Walz and talk about the history repeating itself. Hillary's VP pick was also named Tim. It's an omen. Don't pick a Tim if you're a Democrat. I don't get this. I really don't understand where they're coming from. And then when you look at their economic plans, she's talking about infringing on the patents of pharmaceutical companies. Right? Kimberly just talked about on the economic show about incentives as opposed to punishments. She's talking about taking away their patents. She's talking about increasing taxes to 28%, which will be amongst the highest in the world for corporate tax rates. She's talking about increasing taxes on the wealthy. And the Democrats are always saying the same thing. We just want them to pay their fair share. No problems. Nobody's going to argue with that. Absolutely. We should all be contributing our fair share. Can you tell us what our fair share is? And in America, they say, well, your fair share is everything. We want you to pay all the taxes. So you got the top 10% paying 90% of the taxes in the United States. Come on now.
Shaquille, there is no talk about paying fair taxes. No, they should pay much more than fair share of taxes because they are parasites. They are not creating anything. They are living off on $500 million yachts and traveling around the world. They are not contributing to American economy at all. So they have to be taxed to death and get out of US for all of them.
Right, but we've spent about 6 months of
Let's
listening
about
to you.
$500 million yachts. I don't have a $500 million yacht.
I'm not talking
I'm
about
classified.
you. You're
No,
Australian.
hold up. I'm classified as a top 1%er based on the criteria in the United States. Okay, to be in the top, we went through these figures the other day. To be in the top 10% of income earners in the US, you're talking about 200 and something thousand. To be in the top 5%, you're talking about almost 300. It's not quite 300,000. To be in the top 1%, you're talking about 800,000. Now, somebody who's earning $1 million or $1.5 million or something like that a year, that could be somebody who's an entrepreneur, maybe has a few businesses, maybe trades the markets like we do, something like that, and they earn $1 million or $2 million a year. We're going after those people, the
No,
people that you're talking about that are
no.
uber millionaires,
I'm talking
centimillionaires.
about
Let me finish.
100 of
Those
wealthiest
people that you're
Americans
talking
in the
about.
world. That's all.
Let me finish a second. Those people that you're talking about that are centimillionaires, that are billionaires, that are living on their $500 million yachts, that are using their yacht as a second home and getting a tax deduction, all that sort of stuff, right? Those people we're talking about, this is the top 0.1%. And if
Yep.
you want to be able to capture their wealth in taxes, there's no way you're going to do it under any of the things that are currently being proposed.
Yeah, and one thing I'll
So
add
you
is
make
that
new proposed
Hold
laws. You
on.
just bring up new laws and ask, what have you done for me lately?
I made proposals.
$500 million, yes? Out.
I've
Here.
made proposals. Put a tax on the interest rates that they pay on money they've borrowed against their assets. Okay, you could get away with something like a 1% tax. I mean, you're talking about at the moment in the United States. Again, somebody fact check me. I'm just going from memory now. You're talking about something like $150 trillion that's currently out there in money that's been borrowed against assets to fund other things. You put a 1% interest, 1% tax on that, just 1%, you're getting an extra 1.5 trillion. And people aren't going to leave over 1%. There are ways to be able to do this. And again, look at what Sweden's done. Sweden has recognized that the very wealthy are not happy with these really high tax rates. So what they've done is they've introduced an account that allows people to invest through the account. You have to pay tax regardless of whether or not you make a profit, but the tax rate is like 1%. And it's working for Sweden. Wealthy people are now going to Sweden to take advantage of that program.
Okay.
What's the United States going to do? Well, let's just move taxes up to 90%.
So for the United States, they could introduce a freedom tax. Under freedom tax, all your assets, you
Rick,
have
you
to
want to have a
pay
separate show?
10% of market value of your properties. 10% you paid, good. Now for next year, you're free. A year later, freedom tax, baby. Hello, 10%.
Well, 10%. And where are they supposed to come up with that 10% if they don't have income?
Because y'all can have a whole discussion about economics. Y'all already had a special, and we said we're going to do a part 2 of that at some point.
Well, perhaps I shouldn't have been. Perhaps I shouldn't have been excluded from the economics show today and last week and the week before leading up to an election.
That's another question for other people that
So,
are not
can I say one thing?
and everything. So, Rick, you had a question that you wanted to bring up.
Not a question, but I mean, with just 10 minutes to go, I'm wondering, since this is the media show and polls have been a huge part of the media for the past month or more, whether we're going to have a reckoning if the results of the election don't jibe with all these polls. I kind of doubt it because the polls have been off the last couple elections in various ways, but you know,
Rick, I would highly recommend Rick looking at the Atlas Group polls and Trafalgar polls. And New York Times admitted last night that they oversampled white Democrats by 16%. Now, Sasha, for months you've attacked Trump and called him names. And here's what I haven't heard from you. 2 things. I haven't heard you explain why, given inflation, the policies of the Biden administration, the open border, why Harris is a better pick than Trump. And I haven't heard you explain, ironically, why you don't like Trump? I've never heard you give one reason why you don't like him.
Oh,
Yes, he has. He said he's a liar and he's a crook.
So that's two questions. Why is Harris better than Trump? And even though you've called him names for months, you've never really explained why, on policy, he's the worst choice.
oh, now you are talking about policy. You're not talking about Trump as individual, right? Because you know yourself what is he's like kind of individual is.
I don't care about that. I care about how he's going to help.
You're not
And which
caring
one's a better choice?
Is it criminal and con man is becoming president
sound
of
like
the
Vladimir
strongest
Putin right
army
now.
in the world? He's con man, and it's so documented in myriads of books and lawsuits, and everywhere it's been described. And only blind man who cannot read and cannot listen to anything. He is.
So you're not going to answer my question.
Okay, my question is, first of all, Biden and Kamala Harris, they are much weaker on immigration than Trump. And not because Trump is so strong, not at all. He's full of shit, idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about immigration. He wants to deport tens of millions of illegals from United States.
Well, Clinton did it. Obama did it. Why is it a problem that Trump wants to do it?
Yeah, Obama's deportations were legendary.
Clinton deported 13 million or something. Obama was known as the deporter in chief. Trump says, look, it's too much immigration, we need to deport them. Oh, you're xenophobic. Come on.
Listen,
Obama
very
actually got
soon,
criticism for that,
Trump
by the
will
way, from
have
the
more than enough time in jail
Sasha,
to write his
Sasha,
memoirs, write about policies and everything else. He will have more than enough time to do that.
Sasha, it is okay for you to say that you support Trump. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So go ahead.
You know what? You know what? I don't believe, Sasha, that if you were to actually look at the policies and look at what they're prioritizing, right? Tampons in boys' bathrooms
That's
at
my
school.
point.
Is that something that you're going for? Like our viewer, one of our viewers just put that. Hang on, Rick. I'm actually addressing something the viewer said. So a viewer actually made a comment about this before. Is that really something you're supporting? Unfettered immigration across the southern border, allowing some people to come in, but other people who want to come to the United States are excluded from being able to do so. Is that something you support? Because if you support immigration, as I do, you don't support that, surely. Seriously, increasing taxes on corporations in order to boost the economy, that's never worked. We know that doesn't work unless you've got a commensurate spending directly into people's pockets instead of government programs. Like, what are we talking about?
Got it. Here's what I'm talking about.
Males in women's sport?
Kamala, no, hold on. Kamala has a lot of deficiencies, has a lot of big problems that I completely disagree with. Whatever she's doing and talking about, yes, I agree. But if she is a president, she could go a little bit this way or maybe a little bit that way. But I know that she is not going to create January 6, 21 resurrection that Trump is capable of doing then and even more so now. So this is the biggest disruption of American way of life, of American.
Sasha,
So you're going to put your own hatred above what's good for the American people.
Sasha, she raised funds and funded a bail fund for people that were locked up or people that were arrested for burning down the cities. And she came onto TV and she gave an interview where she said that they will not stop and they should not stop. I would suggest that the amount of pain and hardship that was suffered by a big part of the United States for a couple of years is way worse than what happened on January 6th.
Not at all. No. If on one side you have some criminals who were doing whatever they were doing, it's one thing. Here you have a president of United States who wanted to completely derail democratic system of United States.
Absolutely not.
America.
Absolutely not.
Did he leave the White House peacefully?
Absolutely not. There is a constitutional question, Sasha. There is a constitutional question that
I will never go along with what Trump did on
You must
January.
work on your anger.
Trump asked. Hold up.
Okay, no,
Take a breath. Take a breath. Take a breath. Hold up.
It's all up to you.
Take a breath for a second. Hold up. Two things. One, he said to protest peacefully, but leave that aside for a
No,
minute because
forget
the
about
question,
it.
come on, let me respond.
Lying
And
Sasha,
as
please let me
usual.
respond.
patriotically.
He was
Sasha, in the interest of
lying and
time,
lying as usual.
Sasha, please
And
let me
also
respond.
protest cheerfully and peacefully. Come on, this is
Sasha, please
garbage.
let me,
Don't repeat garbage.
please,
Okay?
please, Sasha, let me respond, please, in the interest of time.
Okay.
The second part where people keep saying that he was trying to undermine the Constitution or tear up the Constitution, undermine democracy. Now, there were questions that were asked about the validity of the voting process. Now, whether or not you believe it was true, and
You
let me
cannot
finish,
do
please let me
seriously.
finish.
You go to
Come on, let me
court
finish.
60
Sasha,
times. You go to
come
court.
on.
You're overthrown out of there. Your
Sasha,
relatives, your advisors tell you
okay,
that there's no evidence that there was a fraud, and yet this idiot is coming on. Go and tell
okay, Sasha,
Come on, what are
Sasha,
you? This
Sasha, you've expressed
is
your viewpoint. Let me
I
let me
agree.
respond to
Two
you.
votes is a
Please let
problem.
me respond to you. You've expressed your viewpoint. Please let me respond. The question for me is if it has failed to go through the court systems and everything else, the question which has never really been tested as far as I know is are they required to just rubber stamp the election or are they able to actually challenge this, challenge the certification? Now, Democrats tried that in 2016 or January 2017 themselves in a different kind of way. The question is, if people believe that there was something amiss with the election, are they allowed to challenge the certification? I believe that they are. Now, whether or not, even if he was successful, whether or not that would have changed the electoral outcome or should have changed the electoral outcome is a different question. But the idea that he shouldn't have even been able to challenge it in the first place, I don't think that that makes sense. Because the fact of the matter is that even if later on there was proven, not in this election, but in any election, there was proven to be fraud, once an election is certified, that's it. So the certification of the election is the last chance for the country to agree and for the elected representatives of the country to agree that the election was legitimate. You seem to be saying that he's trying to tear up the Constitution because he asked, well, why don't we not certify it because there's been all these challenges that the court hasn't done. Now, the court's a judicial branch. This is the legislative branch. They should be able to do that.
My turn.
Thank you.
All right. Hold on.
Later that day, on January 6th, when finally the Congress resumed, there were 139 stupid Republicans who didn't want to certify. Do you know that or not?
Absolutely, because of the fact that they found there to be deficiencies in the electoral process.
He was 60 times in court, was thrown out. His relatives and advisors told him there is no
what's the point of appealing to the? What's the point to appealing?
No, it's not going to work out. And he.
All right, my turn. I haven't two quick things. One, tampons in boys' bathrooms doesn't happen. It's bullshit. If a boys' bathroom is sometimes used as a girls' locker room for visiting teams, if there's a single sex if there's a bathroom that's sometimes used by boys and then by girls, then yeah, they'll put them in there. But a bathroom that's used exclusively by boys, no tampons in California, no tampons in Minnesota.
Rick, I can prove to you that that's not true.
Prove it to me. Find me a freaking link. But all right, so I looked up number of buildings burnt nationwide in the George Floyd protests, 164. So that's not nothing, but it's not the freaking apocalypse.
Oh, come on. Come on.
It's like the MSNBC interview. They're not taking over apartments, these Venezuelan gangs. They've only just taken over 4 or 5 apartments in Aurora, in Colorado. Come on.
Just really quickly, because we got to wrap on time according to the management and everything along those lines. Bail funds are not necessarily bad. I'll just add that because I got folks involved in the bail fund industry, but we can have a whole conversation about that.
Well, then bail funds January 6th, people. If bail funds are not bad, don't let just the people on the left do it. make sure that you offer the bail to people, no matter what their political persuasion. So why not have a bail fund for the
I'm
January
good
6th
for bail
people?
funds across the board, and I've been involved with bail funds across the board. So I have no problem with January 6th having a bail fund either, because there have been bail funds for people on the right as well. I'll just add that. The other question I was going to ask Richard, we didn't get to in the media, but we can say that for next meeting and everything. It's kind of what I brought up at the beginning about this kind of like looking at the accidents as they're getting ready to happen. I personally think, because he brought up that Jimmy Kimmel says that talk radio is getting ready to go. I remember that there was a day, and I don't know if they're still popular, when people used to love watching certain kinds of reality TV because they were going to see those people clash. That was that whole thing around DNA tests and a number of other tests, whether that was
Jerry Springer
or a number of other folks. And they were very popular back in the day because folks
Maury Povich. Hey, Rick, let me ask you a question about that SNL skit, right? The incredibly hilarious comedy skit from Kamala Harris. Don't you think when you watch that and watch the Donald Trump Jimmy Fallon skit that she basically plagiarized that as well?
I only saw the one. I didn't see the Trump thing. I saw the Harris thing. I didn't see the Trump.
Trump did the same thing with Jimmy Fallon in front of the same like see-through mirror type thing, dressing room mirror. That was his skit. She stole that. Come on.
Well, it's not her. It's the SNL writer. She didn't write her skit. So, I mean, if you want to accuse somebody, accuse them. People don't, for the most part, don't write their own skits when they come on SNL.
Yeah. So.